Modern Warfare's update yesterday brought with it a pair of new maps, some technical fixes, and for the discussion of this video, most importantly, its own set of balancing adjustments to weaponry. Weapons affected were the 7.25, the M4A1, the entirety of the rifle, SMG, and pistol classifications, and the LMGs of the MG34, the M91, the PKM, as well as the Uzi SMG were all adjusted. While some of these were definitely updates the community asked for, just how much of it did it shake up the meta of Modern Warfare's MP? How much of what we'd seen up until this point really was changed all that much? Is the 7.25 still king? Is there any weapon that can squeak in and take a crown of maybe the top 5? Today I want to talk to you guys about the, in my opinion, best 5 weapons after the update here in Modern Warfare. Of course, this is entirely subjective and you may feel differently, and if that's the case, of course it's totally fine, but feel free to let me know what you'd add into this list. But I wanted to share with you guys some of the weapons that I think are flourishing now, and in some cases may still be flourishing. So if you guys want to just play around and try and do well, maybe take a break from those camo challenges like I've been doing, you can get a glimpse into my mind as to what I think the best ones here are. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Firstly, to start out with our number 1 weapon, I want to start out with a weapon that I think is moving up in the power rankings, one that pre-patch, I'm not necessarily sure I'd put it right in the top 5, but it was kind of just on the outside looking in, right on the cusp of it, though now I definitely think it has snuck in, that being the M13. Is it the best of the 5 weapons we'll talk about? I don't think so, but I'd probably say it would maybe peak at like number 3, but I wanted to start with a newer weapon here for the sake of just getting some more information out there, not talking about stuff that may be returning as the top 5 weapons. Now, starting with the bugged camo challenges, I started to move away from just using one weapon at a time like I started Modern Warfare out doing, just trying to stay focused on that camo grind, but I went quickly to the M13 just because I remembered loving it earlier in pre-release, but what's strange to me is that right out of the gate, I was able to do pretty well with this. The stock weapon feels like it has a little more power in each shot, but is a little bit better of a close quarters version of the M4. And you add in things like the higher fire rate of the M13, and you've got what feels like an M4 SMG hybrid in my books. Especially when you consider that yesterday in the update, assault rifles got a damage reduction at range for full auto 5.56 rifles, the M13 being one of those. But when you consider its stability at its base, whenever you take a look at the stock weapon, is it as powerful as things like, say, the AK-47? Not necessarily, but it also doesn't have the kick of the AK-47. Does it have the damage of the base SCAR? No, but it does have a faster fire rate, which can compensate for that, offering up the ability to land more shots in a similar amount of time as compared to what's lethal for the SCAR, and so on and so forth. When you start to add things like the attachments on it, you can really start to utilize its mobility, you can start to use its ADS-in times, you can start to use its ease of control at mid-range, and it starts to become something that you can absolutely shred with. I'm still currently on the grind to completely rank this thing up and to max it out, but in the time that I've had a great time with it. So I definitely tossed this one in on the top 5 list. Again, would I put it in the top 3? Maybe number 3, but that's probably given the day and the lobbies that I've had at the time. But anyways, jumping over, another weapon that I think probably squeaks in now here for the top 5 is that of the MP5. Now, I say the MP5 and an SMG for the fact that SMG's got actually a pretty substantial buff as of yesterday in the adjustments. The entire classification ended up seeing the increase to the movement speed, an increase to the ADS move speed, and also a quicker sprint out time. So that means that you're able to move faster with SMGs. If you're aiming down sight, you can strafe a little quicker, and also a quicker sprint out time means that you can end up going from your run to having your gun up and being ADS a tad quicker than you could before, which in this game, if you know how the TTK works and how fast it is, that could literally be life or death. So when you consider that stuff that was added in, personally, I think the MP5 is one of the better SMGs, though it might be in some cases outclassed by, say, an MP7 or something like that. The MP5 overall as a base SMG, something that is versatile at all ranges and viable in almost all SMG situations, I'd say the MP5 has a leg above the other ones here with this. It's mobile, it has a decent mid-range, it's easy to control, especially with the right attachments, so therefore if you know how to aim higher, you can land headshot after headshot after headshot, making it even a quicker TTK. And with these mobility adjustments here to it, it allows you to get into action and dip out into cover if you need to a lot quicker as well. So if you are somebody that, like me, is somebody that likes to rush a little bit more, you can, as opposed to having to play it a little bit more passively in some scenarios where you had to before. So the MP5 definitely is one that I think, again, is just a leg above the other SMGs. That's my own personal preference. You guys may disagree, and that's totally fine, but for that sake, the SMG's got a pretty big buff, but I think the MP5 just stands out a little bit more than the other ones. Outside of that, though, this is where we start to come back down to the sense of normalcy, where you start to see that these weapons that we talked about before are in fact still pretty powerful. Even though they were adjusted, even though they were nerfed, they are still pretty meta. So that said, first things first, the M4A1. Now, on top of rifles already having a slight nerf to it in the sense that at range, it of course had that damage reduction with the full auto 5.56 rifles, the M4A1 being one of those, but also then the increase to the hip fire spread to reduce effectiveness up close. That stuff was adjusted across the board to all rifles. But the M4A1 had a little extra step forward to it in terms of what was toned back. That being the fact that it also reduced the damage range specifically on the M4A1 and also increased the recoil ever so slightly. Now you add in that with the fact that of course prone and crouching no longer really is effective to mitigate any recoil, and that compounds on it. But the M4A1, given these adjustments, given the reductions in their damage range and things like that, it's still pretty versatile. It's still pretty powerful. And if you were to jump in and play a game of at least relative competitiveness, you'd still see that you could be that step above the rest in terms of other weaponry. When we mention the M13 and we're talking about how it does it compare base and even with attachments to things like the AK and to the SCAR, you may have noticed that I didn't say anything about the M4A1 because admittedly, it's still better than the M13. Whenever you take a look at it, at its base, the M4 is still pretty much the overall all-around rifle that you can end up using. It's good in close quarters, though it did have that reduction in terms of its effectiveness at close quarters with an increase to the hip fire spread. It's still pretty lethal. It's something that mid-range, of course, with the lack thereof of some recoil if you have some attachments and know how to control it, it's still a laser shooter. At range, it's still pretty good. You might need to put in like one extra shot or so to end up killing an enemy, but it's still absolutely ridiculous. Add all that in on top to the fact that, to my knowledge, it still has the fastest time to kill out of any of the rifles. It's still absolutely insane. And so therefore, I'd still place this one probably within the top 3 weapons, not even just the top 5 of this video, but I'd say it's probably still an upper echelon weapon in and of itself. But that adjustment really didn't change all that much. I'd still definitely put this closer to the top. Next thing we'll talk about is the AK-47, one that I don't know if I would again put it in the top 5 before this update, kind of probably the same scenario as the M13, just on the outside looking in, but if it wasn't a part of that top 5, I'd probably put it at number 6 beforehand, just because, I mean, the thing actually has an insane damage profile comparatively, but some attributes do make it so you have to learn how to master those before you can actually take full advantage of said damage profile. But the AK-47 actually was one that didn't get hit with as much AR adjustments as you may think. That less damage at long range for full auto 5.56 rifles, that doesn't apply to the AK because it's a 7.62 weapon. So the only thing that was really adjusted was an increase to the hip fire to reduce the effectiveness of it in close quarters, but everything else still pretty much stayed the same. So when you add in the fact that it does have that damage profile, it has the just slightly second best TTK just behind the M4A1, it can absolutely be lethal in a very short turnaround. It's definitely a weapon though that you do want to have this maxed out. You want to have as many attachments at your disposal as possible, just because the recoil can get a little nuts at times. The handling could be better when you're at its base, but whenever you end up maxing this out, whenever you end up giving it its full potential, it can absolutely drive through enemies. And the final weapon we'll talk about that rounds out what I think is the top 5 still within this update or post-update is the 7.25. Now this is one that I'm sure a lot of people don't want to hear, or depending on who you are, you're still saying it's either the best or maybe it did drop out of the top 5. Personally, I've experienced it where it's been a top 5 weapon against me whenever I tried to use it earlier. Maybe it was just me playing solo. I was having some terrible luck with this thing. But what was adjusted here with this was the increase to the ADS as well as hip fire spread. But at the same time, it's a shotgun, so there's not really much that in most cases that's gonna deter the outcome of the gunfight too much. You can increase that spread all you want, but if I'm still right on top of somebody, they're dead in one shot. It also reduced the damage range, and this is one that I know that I'm going to hear some comments saying that it doesn't seem like they did, but having played with it without any barrel adjustments just to test out the stock range pre and post patch, I definitely noticed that there was a difference here with it. It was maybe just only a decrease of a couple of meters in game, but it was definitely something that 2 days ago pre-patch, I was getting kills, whereas now I wasn't. So those sort of situations definitely maybe a little harder to gauge, but it was in fact dropped a little bit. But is it still a top 5 weapon? I definitely think so. But that said, that is the top 5 weapons here that I think after this update, the first major tuning pass for Modern Warfare this year. Is it going to be the last? Absolutely not. We're going to see some more adjustments here coming maybe within the next couple of weeks or so, especially as more data is collected, more things will be slightly fine-tuned, and then who knows, maybe this will shift up this list even more. That said, that's what we're going to call it. And I want to get your thoughts and feedback down there in the comment section down below. What do you guys think here of this? Is there something you'd maybe replace a top 5 choice in my books here, or maybe you agree with this list? Whatever it is, feel free to put your thoughts in the comments down below. But hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to drop a like down below, and of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Modern Warfare. If you guys also want to follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, those are the best places to get connected from outside of YouTube. I live on both those. So if you guys want to strike up a conversation, ask me a question, whatever it may be, that link is down there in the description below. That said, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.